An act of war. That's the accusation against Japanese whalers over the sinking of a high-tech anti-whaling boat. The Sea Shepherd's Arctic sank overnight while being towed. The activists claim that the whalers were under orders and deliberately rammed their boat.
The ABC understands that at the Wellington meeting, Japan said it regarded the incident as regrettable but a low-key event. This morning, a spokesman for the New Zealand Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, said contrary to media reports, Japan hasn't lodged a stern complaint with the New Zealand government. He says Japanese officials agreed with New Zealand that their citizens need to have better regard for people on the high seas. The spokesman said legal action over the collision hadn't been discussed because it still hasn't been established who was at fault.
The Arctic has sunk. We've lost the vessel. The crew fought all yesterday to try and salvage it, but they were able to remove the fuel and oil, so there is no pollution, and some of the electronics. But the vessel was taking on water, and they tried to tow it to the French base on the coast, but the weather got worse, and we lost the vessel.
Maritime New Zealand has launched an investigation. Kerry Ritchie, ABC News, Auckland.
The federal government says it's committed to finding a diplomatic solution to the standoff, but anti-whaling campaigners are losing patience. Activists want legal action to force an immediate end to the so-called scientific whaling. But what are the chances of success? Professor Don Rothwell is an international law expert at the Australian National University in Canberra. Professor, if this whaling is happening in Australia's Antarctic waters, why can't the government stop Japan under Australian law?
The difficulty is that Japan doesn't recognise Australian sovereignty over the Australian Antarctic territory and accordingly doesn't recognise Australian jurisdiction and the capacity to apply and enforce Australian law in the adjacent waters offshore the Australian Antarctic territory. So any attempt to enforce Australian law would be inflammatory, could even imperil the Antarctic treaty system.
So what's the alternative? What are the chances of success of legal action under international law?
Look, the arguments really are very strong. They revolve around whether or not Japan's whaling program is really commercial whaling in disguise. And that's important because all commercial whaling is currently prohibited under the Whaling Convention. And while Japan says that it's undertaking scientific whaling, the number of whales that it takes is far in excess of what in any way could be legitimate scientific whaling.
So if Australia sought action in the international courts, how soon could we get an injunction to stop this whaling?
Well, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea could issue an international injunction in anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks of those proceedings actually having commenced. So if a decision was made in Canberra to go forward with this matter, I'm very confident that Australia would have immediate success in having an international injunction issued. We'd then have to wait until the merits of the case were decided, which could possibly take up to a year.
But there is a lot on the line here. Japan is Australia's biggest export market. Could legal action threaten that relationship?
I don't believe so. I think the relationship between the two countries is very robust, and it needs to be recalled that in 1999 Australia, along with New Zealand, took Japan to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in a dispute concerning tuna. That didn't impact upon the bilateral relationship. We currently have disputes with New Zealand over trade concerning apples. That's not affecting the bilateral relationship. So I think that providing there's a strong bilateral relationship to begin with, and clearly there is with Japan, commencing international legal action over whales would not unduly impair that relationship.
Professor Don Rothwell, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.